What if I told you that the key to unlocking your motivation, your energy, your drive doesn't come from some hack, a pill, or a motivational video, but from something already inside you? It's a chemical, a molecule, and it's shaping every decision you make, every goal you chase or fail to pursue. It's called dopamine. And while most people think of it as the reward molecule, the truth is much deeper. Dopamine is not about the reward itself. It's about the pursuit. It's about forward momentum. It's what makes us strive, build, and endure. But here's the problem. In today's world, we're unknowingly destroying our own baseline dopamine. Social media, junk food, constant novelty, we're flooding our brains with spikes that lead to crashes. And over time, we lose motivation. We burn out. We feel stuck. So today I'm going to show you how to protect, restore, and elevate your baseline dopamine so you can reclaim your natural drive not just for a day but for life. Most people associate dopamine with pleasure, feeling good when you get a reward when you achieve something, or when you consume something enjoyable. But that's only part of the story. The truth is, dopamine is far more about anticipation than the reward itself. It's about the energy that propels you forward, that makes you pursue a goal, that fuels effort and motivation. And to understand how to truly improve your motivation and drive, you need to grasp a crucial distinction: the difference between dopamine spikes and your dopamine baseline. Every time you experience something pleasurable or novel, whether it's eating a delicious food, scrolling through social media, watching a viral video, or even achieving a personal goal, your brain releases a pulse or spike of dopamine. This gives you a temporary boost, a sense of excitement, satisfaction, or thrill. But here's the key: after every spike, dopamine levels drop. And if those spikes are too frequent or too intense, the baseline, the steady level of dopamine that keeps you motivated in everyday life, starts to decrease over time. Your baseline dopamine is like the foundation of a building. It's what supports everything else. If the foundation is solid, you have the resilience, energy, and drive to push through challenges, to stay consistent, and to stay focused. But when you constantly chase dopamine highs through easy, low-effort sources like constant stimulation or digital rewards, you begin to erode that foundation. The brain adapts by lowering its baseline. Why? Because the brain's goal is balance, and too much artificial stimulation tells your system that it needs to downregulate its dopamine receptors. It's like a speaker that keeps getting turned up louder and louder. So eventually the system starts muting it just to protect itself. What happens then? Motivation starts to collapse. Tasks that used to feel energizing now feel dull. You wake up tired, even if you've slept. You procrastinate more. You start needing more stimulation just to feel anything. It becomes a vicious cycle where the things that once gave you pleasure or drive no longer work, and you keep reaching for stronger hits, more caffeine, more scrolling, more novelty, more distractions. This is exactly why so many people today feel chronically unmotivated, not because they're lazy, not because they lack goals, but because their baseline dopamine has been silently dropping, day by day, through constant overexposure to artificial highs. To break this cycle, the first step is awareness. Understand that your dopamine system wasn't designed for modern life. It evolved to reward sustained effort, purpose, and meaningful action, not passive consumption. If you want to truly improve your motivation and drive, you must stop hijacking the system with quick dopamine hits and start protecting and elevating your baseline through intentional behaviors. That means choosing discomfort when needed, delaying gratification, and seeking out rewards that are effort-based. That's the path toward long-term motivation, not just fleeting inspiration. In the modern world, we are constantly surrounded by things specifically designed to capture our attention and trigger our dopamine systems. Social media platforms, fast food, video games, streaming services, they're all engineered to give you fast, frequent, and intense dopamine spikes. Every notification, every like, every sugary bite, or next episode is a small hit of pleasure, novelty, and reward. And while this might feel good in the moment, what most people don't realize is that this continuous exposure to artificial stimulation is slowly depleting their motivation and mental drive. The problem is that the human brain wasn't built for this level of stimulation. Dopamine, as a neurotransmitter, evolved to reinforce behaviors that were essential for survival: seeking food, building shelter, forming social bonds, and pursuing long-term goals. In the past, these behaviors required real effort, patience, and delayed gratification. But now, with just a few taps or swipes, we can access an endless stream of dopamine-triggering content with virtually no effort. This creates a distorted environment in which high-frequency, high-intensity rewards are always available, but they come without the meaningful pursuit that the brain evolved to link with dopamine release. What this does is confuse and overwhelm the brain's reward prediction system. The brain starts to expect dopamine all the time, and it gets desensitized. Think of it like listening to loud music non-stop. At first it's exciting and energizing, but after a while, your ears adjust, and the same music no longer hits as hard. You have to turn the volume up to feel something. That's what happens with your dopamine receptors. The more often you overstimulate them, the more your brain adapts by reducing its sensitivity to dopamine. This is what's known as dopamine downregulation. As a result, the things that used to motivate you, working toward a goal, studying, exercising, building something meaningful, no longer feel as rewarding. Your baseline dopamine drops, and with it your capacity to feel motivated drops too. You begin to crave more stimulation to feel even a fraction of what you used to. This leads to a cycle of dependence on low-effort, high-stimulation behaviors, like constantly checking your phone, endlessly scrolling, or seeking comfort food and entertainment. And it's not just about mood or energy. This overstimulation directly impacts your ability to focus, delay gratification, and pursue long-term goals. You might find yourself unable to sit still, procrastinating, or losing interest in things you once loved. That's not a personal failure. That's neurochemistry. You've trained your brain to expect immediate rewards, and it starts rejecting anything that doesn't deliver fast pleasure. Even more dangerously, this pattern can contribute to feelings of depression, apathy, and burnout. When your brain is no longer responding to natural sources of dopamine, you feel emotionally flat. Nothing feels exciting, nothing feels worth the effort. And this can have profound effects on your productivity, your relationships, and your overall quality of life. The good news is this cycle can be reversed, but it starts by becoming deeply aware of the dopamine traps you're falling into. These traps are seductive because they offer ease and instant gratification, but they rob you of the deeper, more sustainable form of drive that comes from effort-based rewards. The key is not to eliminate pleasure from your life, but to rebalance how you engage with dopamine. You must learn to delay short-term spikes in favor of longer-term gains. You must reduce passive, high-reward behaviors and create space for effort, focus, and intention. This means reducing mindless digital consumption, limiting processed food, resisting the urge to multitask, and becoming more deliberate about where you place your attention. It means teaching your brain, once again, that true satisfaction and motivation come not from the quick hit, but from the journey itself. When you stop chasing instant dopamine and start investing in meaningful effort, your brain will begin to reset. Your baseline will rise. And with that, your motivation and drive will return, not artificially, but naturally and powerfully. One of the most effective yet often overlooked strategies for restoring motivation and improving baseline dopamine is the practice of controlled dopamine fasting. At first, the term might sound extreme or even unnecessary. After all, dopamine is a natural and essential neurotransmitter, and it's not something we can or should eliminate completely. But the idea behind a dopamine fast isn't to eliminate dopamine itself. It's to reduce the frequency and intensity of the artificial spikes we've become addicted to, and in doing so, allow the brain's reward system to recalibrate. It's about giving your dopamine system space to recover, to reset, and to return to a more natural and sustainable baseline. Imagine you're listening to your favorite song on full blast all day, every day. At first, it's thrilling, but eventually your ears adjust, and the song loses its emotional impact. The same thing happens with dopamine. When you're constantly stimulated by digital inputs, food, entertainment, and novelty, your brain adapts. It starts expecting that level of stimulation and becomes numb to anything less intense. That's when natural rewards, like taking a walk, having a conversation, or working toward a goal, begin to feel boring or even exhausting. You start to feel unmotivated, not because you lack goals or ambition, but because your brain has been conditioned to only respond to extreme, fast dopamine hits. Dopamine fasting works by removing, or at least temporarily reducing, those sources of artificial stimulation. It means intentionally creating windows of time where you step away from digital devices, social media, constant notifications, processed food, and even unnecessary multitasking. This practice creates a form of controlled discomfort which is incredibly powerful for rebalancing your neurochemistry. By stepping back from these high-frequency rewards, you're giving your brain a chance to downregulate the constant noise, to become more sensitive to natural sources of pleasure again. During a dopamine fast, the goal isn't to do nothing, it's to re-engage with low-stimulation, high-awareness activities. Things like walking without headphones, journaling, reading a physical book, meditating, doing deep, undistracted work. These practices feel quiet and even uncomfortable at first, especially if your brain is used to constant input, but over time they begin to rebuild your capacity for focus, patience, and long-term satisfaction. And most importantly, they start to elevate your baseline dopamine, the steady level of motivation that underlies your ability to pursue goals and take action. One of the most fascinating aspects of this process is how quickly the brain can begin to recalibrate. Just 24 to 48 hours of reduced stimulation can begin to restore dopamine sensitivity. Over a few days or weeks of consistent practice, your ability to focus improves, your mood stabilizes, and you begin to feel motivated by things that once felt out of reach. You start to notice subtle pleasures again, like the feeling of the sun on your skin, the satisfaction of completing a small task, or the clarity of being fully present in a moment. It's important to recognize that this isn't about asceticism or deprivation. It's about reclaiming control. When you take back control of your attention and remove constant stimulation, you're teaching your brain that it doesn't need external noise to feel alive. You're allowing your natural motivation to resurface, not in the form of artificial hype, but as a steady internal drive. This kind of reset is particularly powerful in a world that constantly competes for your attention. Every app, every advertisement, every algorithm is designed to hijack your dopamine system. Practicing controlled fasting from these triggers, even just for a few hours a day, builds resilience. It teaches your brain to tolerate discomfort, to resist impulsive behaviors, and to find reward in effort rather than just consumption. Ultimately, dopamine fasting is a tool. It's not about being perfect or rigid. It's about periodically stepping back from the noise so that you can move forward with clarity. When you give your brain space to breathe, you begin to feel motivated again, not because the world has changed, but because your inner chemistry has been rebalanced. And that shift is what allows you to engage with life from a place of purpose, energy, and sustainable drive. One of the most transformative ways to elevate and stabilize your baseline dopamine is by shifting your focus from outcomes to effort. In our society, we are conditioned to value rewards, the final achievement, the goal reached, the praise received, the number of likes, the promotion, the win. But what neuroscience reveals is that the dopamine system isn't just activated when we achieve something, it's profoundly engaged during the process of pursuit. In fact, the anticipation of reward often triggers more dopamine than the reward itself. This means that when you learn to associate dopamine with the effort you put in, rather than the result you get, you unlock a much more powerful and sustainable form of motivation. When you only associate dopamine with outcomes, your motivation becomes fragile. If the reward is delayed, or if it doesn't come at all, your drive collapses. This is especially true in long-term goals, whether it's building a business, learning a skill, transforming your health, or working through a difficult period in life. These paths don't offer constant external rewards. Progress is slow. The wins are sometimes invisible. If your brain is wired only to release dopamine at the finish line, it will interpret the entire journey as meaningless or painful. That's why so many people give up, not because they aren't capable, but because they haven't trained their brain to value the process. But there's a way to change that. When you begin to consciously reward effort, when you take note of the fact that you showed up, that you pushed through resistance, that you gave your full attention to something hard, you start rewiring your dopamine circuitry. You begin to experience satisfaction from the act of trying itself. This creates a self-reinforcing loop. The more you push yourself to engage in effortful activities and reward yourself mentally for that effort, the more dopamine you release during those moments. Over time, your brain learns effort is the reward. This shift can be deeply empowering. It means your motivation is no longer at the mercy of external validation or immediate results. You become intrinsically motivated, driven by your own internal metrics, by the pride you feel in working hard, by the satisfaction of being consistent. This is the kind of motivation that doesn't burn out, because it's not tied to fleeting outcomes. It's tied to who you are becoming in the process. And the research backs this up. Studies on goal pursuit and behavioral reinforcement have shown that people who focus on progress rather than perfection, and who learn to emotionally reinforce their own effort, are significantly more likely to achieve long-term success. This applies to athletes, entrepreneurs, students, artists, anyone who is engaged in a meaningful challenge. It's not the most talented or the most resourced who win. It's the ones who learn to love the climb. To practically implement this in your life, start paying attention to how you talk to yourself during effort. Do you only feel good when you finish something, or can you train yourself to feel good when you start, when you persist, when you stay with something even when it's uncomfortable? This internal reward system is like a muscle. It grows stronger the more you use it. Celebrate the small wins, the quiet disciplines, the unseen struggles. These are the moments that truly build character and drive. And there's something else. When you attach dopamine to effort, you become less vulnerable to failure. Because now, even when you don't get the result you wanted, you still feel a sense of accomplishment for having tried. You see setbacks as part of the process, not as the end of the story. This builds resilience. It keeps you moving forward. It protects you from the emotional crashes that come with outcome-dependent motivation. In a world obsessed with results, this perspective is radical, but it's also liberating. Because when you learn to derive dopamine from effort, you realize that motivation is not something you have to wait for. It's something you can generate right now by leaning into the challenge in front of you. Every time you do that, you're not just getting closer to your goal, you're training your brain to love the pursuit. And that, more than anything else, is the key to lasting drive. One of the most scientifically supported and immediately accessible ways to elevate your baseline dopamine is through consistent physical exercise. While most people associate exercise with building muscle, losing weight, or improving cardiovascular health, the truth is that movement profoundly reshapes your brain chemistry, particularly your dopamine system. Regular physical activity doesn't just make you stronger or leaner, it rewires your motivation, focus, and overall sense of well-being from the inside out. When you engage in physical exercise, especially forms that involve sustained effort like running, cycling, resistance training, or high-intensity interval training, your brain begins to release a cascade of neurochemicals. Among these are dopamine, norepinephrine, and serotonin. But what's particularly important is how exercise impacts baseline dopamine levels, not just the immediate spike you feel during or after a workout. Over time, consistent exercise increases the availability of dopamine receptors in key areas of the brain, such as the striatum and prefrontal cortex. This means that not only do you have more dopamine circulating, but your brain becomes more sensitive to it. In other words, you don't just feel good after exercise, you start to feel more driven, more focused, and more motivated in everyday life. This is crucial for anyone struggling with low motivation, brain fog, or a sense of being stuck. Often, when people feel flat or unmotivated, their first instinct is to wait for inspiration or reach for a quick fix, whether it's caffeine, sugar, scrolling through social media, or some other form of fast stimulation. But these are temporary spikes. They don't fix the core problem, which is that your baseline dopamine is depleted. Exercise, on the other hand, addresses the problem at its root. It rebuilds your system. It teaches your brain that effort leads to reward, and it does so through a natural, biologically sustainable process. There's also something uniquely powerful about the psychological side of physical training. When you choose to engage in movement, even when you don't feel like it, you are reinforcing a critical pattern in the brain: effort over emotion. You're training yourself to act despite resistance. Every time you complete a workout, even a short one, you send a signal to your brain: I do hard things, I show up. That message, repeated day after day, rewires your identity and reinforces a feedback loop of competence, confidence, and self-generated motivation. Moreover, the benefits of exercise on dopamine are not only long-term, they are cumulative. The more consistently you move, the more responsive your brain becomes to the natural highs of life. You start noticing subtle rewards again. A conversation feels more engaging. A book feels more interesting. Tasks that once felt overwhelming become manageable. This is not because life has changed, but because your brain has changed. Your baseline dopamine has risen, and with it, your capacity to experience pleasure and pursue meaningful goals has expanded. What's also remarkable is that this doesn't require extreme training. You don't need to become a marathon runner or a power lifter. Even moderate, consistent movement, like walking briskly for 30 minutes a day, lifting weights a few times a week, or doing a few sets of bodyweight exercises can produce dramatic shifts in dopamine tone. What matters most is the consistency and the effort. The intensity can grow over time, but the habit of showing up again and again is what creates lasting neurochemical change. It's also worth noting that exercise reduces inflammation in the brain, improves blood flow, enhances the production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, the BDNF, and supports the growth of new neural pathways. These changes collectively make the brain more adaptive, more resilient, and more responsive to all forms of reward. In essence, regular movement makes your brain more alive. If you're feeling chronically unmotivated or emotionally flat, it's easy to believe that the solution lies in some complex psychological insight or life breakthrough. But often the answer is far more primal. Your body needs to move. Your nervous system needs to be engaged. Your brain needs the feedback that comes from exertion, struggle, and physical challenge. Exercise is not just good for your body, it is fuel for your drive, your ambition, and your ability to take consistent action. In a world that keeps us sedentary and overstimulated, choosing to move your body becomes a form of rebellion, a conscious decision to reclaim your biology and rebuild your motivation from within. When you make movement a non-negotiable part of your life, you're not just becoming healthier, you're becoming more alive, more motivated, and more capable of creating the life you want. Because ultimately your drive doesn't come from outside you. It comes from the chemistry of effort, and exercise is one of the most powerful tools we have to access it.